In the vast, cold barn, Corbin stared at the dead control panel. His dog, Gale, was supposed to be his emotional anchor, the calm that pulled him from his nightmares. But Gale was not calm. The dog stood motionless in the middle of the room, his entire body rigid, a low, fearful growl vibrating deep in his chest. Corbin called his name, but Gale ignored him. The growl wasn't aimed at the door or the shadows. It was aimed straight down, at the floor. Suddenly, the dog began to scratch, his claws raking hard at a single old floorboard. The calm dog was now frantic, desperate, as if haunted by a sound only he could hear. Corbin realized this wasn't just a dog, it was a warning. What secret lay buried beneath their feet, so terrifying it could shatter the composure of the most loyal dog? Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The air conditioner in the ceiling vent clicked, followed by a low, steady hum. A rhythmic thrum. Whump, whump, whump. Corbin's jaw tightened. The sound of the high-altitude wind over Bagram. The steady, hypnotic beat of the Pavehawk's main rotor. He could almost smell the jet fuel and the metallic tang of the thin, cold air. He closed his eyes for just a second, forcing the polished mahogany of the lawyer's desk back into focus. It was just an air conditioner. It was 2025. He was in North Carolina, not Afghanistan. The room felt small, suffocating. It smelled of old paper, leather-bound books, and faint, lemony floor polish. Corbin felt conspicuously out of place, a rough stone pressed into a velvet box. He was a tall man in his late 40s with a lean, wiry build that spoke of restless energy rather than disciplined exercise. His short brown hair was visibly gray at the temples, cut practically and without style. His face was rugged, etched with lines of sun and stress, and softened only by a short, slightly thick beard that was more gray than brown. He wore his standard uniform, faded blue denim jeans, sturdy work boots, and a gray t-shirt under an unbuttoned plaid flannel shirt, its colors a muted blend of navy, gray, and beige. Across the desk sat Mr. Sinclair, the family lawyer. Sinclair was a precise man in a dark gray suit, his thinning hair combed perfectly over. He adjusted the rimless glasses on his nose and looked at Corbin with an expression of polite, practiced neutrality. To Corbin's left sat his cousin, Gavin. Gavin was everything Corbin was not. While Corbin looked like he had just stepped out of a workshop, Gavin looked like he had just stepped off a magazine cover. He wore an impeccably tailored dark blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and he radiated an aura of restless energy and expensive cologne. He kept checking his watch, a sliver of platinum and glass, as if this reading of a dead relative's final wishes was an inconvenience cutting into his stock market hours. Gavin glanced at Corbin, his gaze lingering for a moment on Corbin's worn boots before dismissing him entirely. The failure, the hermit, the broken soldier who had come home from the war years ago and promptly disappeared into a tiny rented cabin 2 states away. "If we are all settled," Mr. Sinclair began, his voice dry as parchment. He lifted the document. "We are here today to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Orville." Corbin shifted. He had not seen his great-uncle Orville in nearly 5 years. Orville was the black sheep, the family eccentric, a brilliant acoustic engineer who, decades ago, had abruptly quit a high-paying government contract, cashed out his investments, and bought a massive, useless tract of land deep in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. He had built a strange experimental wind farm in a place the locals called Howling Wind Valley. And then, as far as the rest of the family was concerned, he had simply ceased to exist. Gavin leaned forward, clasping his manicured hands on the table. This was his part of the program. As a successful real estate investor, Gavin was the only one in the family who understood money. Orville, for all his eccentricity, had supposedly been sitting on a significant portfolio. Mr. Sinclair cleared his throat. "To my nephew, Gavin, I bequeath the entirety of my stock portfolio held with Morgan Stanley and the contents of my primary checking account, number 7749, in recognition of his financial acumen." Gavin gave a sharp, satisfied nod, as if accepting a foregone conclusion. He relaxed back into the leather chair, the picture of entitlement confirmed. Corbin felt a sense of relief. He wanted nothing. He had come only out of a distant, nagging sense of duty. Now he could leave. He could get back in his old truck, drive the 8 hours back to his quiet cabin, and try to forget the whump of the air conditioner. And now, Mr. Sinclair continued, turning a page. We address the matter of the primary physical asset, the property known as Howling Wind Valley Farm, encompassing 300 acres, the primary residence, all outbuildings, and associated machinery. Corbin watched as Gavin sat up straight again, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. This property, Mr. Sinclair read slowly, along with the contents of the attached maintenance and stipend account, I bequeath to my great-nephew, Corbin. The silence in the room was absolute. Gavin froze, his self-satisfied smile locking, then cracking. What? Corbin just stared. He did not understand. He did not want a farm. He did not want 300 acres of wind and rock. Mr. Sinclair held up a hand, peering over his glasses at Gavin. Please, let me finish. There is a specific addendum. I bequeath Howling Wind Valley Farm to Corbin and all property thereon, including the caretaker agreement with Mr. Arlo, and specifically my German Shepherd dog, Gale. Gale. Corbin's head lifted. The name sparked a memory. He vaguely recalled the dog from his last brief visit. A younger dog then, but already possessing a quiet intensity. A German Shepherd, 8 years old now he supposed, but not the typical black and tan. This one was different, a rare sable pattern, predominantly silver gray and white, like a creature of mist and mountain rock. Orville had called him the Valley's Ghost. A dog. He had inherited a dog. This is an insult, Gavin said, his voice low and sharp. There is one final note from Mr. Orville himself, Mr. Sinclair said loudly, cutting off the interruption. He read from a handwritten insert. I leave my portfolio to Gavin, as he only understands price. I leave my valley to Corbin, for he is the only one in our family who understands the difference between value and price. The words hung in the air. Value and price. A riddle, Gavin spat. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the hardwood floor. He stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. A defunct, rusted-out wind farm? And the dog? He left me the money, fine, but he left him the land? Mr. Sinclair remained impassive. The terms of the will are clear, Gavin. Clear? It is madness. Gavin pointed a finger at Corbin, who had not moved, his hands resting quietly in his lap. Do you know what that land is? It is worthless. The turbines have not spun in a decade. The access road washes out every spring. It is a pile of rocks and scrap metal. Corbin said nothing. Gavin began pacing, his agitation growing. I offered Orville a fortune for that valley years ago, a development deal, a luxury mountain resort. He refused me. He said the valley was listening, Gavin scoffed. Listening, the old fool. He stopped pacing and stared at the wall, his eyes narrowing in calculation. The anger was fading, replaced by a cold, sudden suspicion. He refused me, Gavin repeated, quieter this time. He refused a 7-figure offer for a pile of rust. He turned, his gaze locking onto Corbin with a new, dangerous intensity. He must have hidden something valuable, not the farm, something in the farm, minerals, a rare earth deposit, something, and he left it to him. Gavin looked at Corbin with pure contempt. He has no idea what to do with it. He cannot even manage his own life. This is a mistake, Sinclair, a serious mistake. Corbin finally looked up, his eyes meeting Gavin's. He still felt the phantom vibration of the rotor blades in his chest, but Orville's words echoed louder. Value and price. He thought of the gray dog, Gale. When can I get the keys? Corbin asked, his voice quiet, rough from disuse. The 8-hour drive was a descent. Corbin left the clipped lawns and polite traffic of the city, pushing west until the highways narrowed, the concrete giving way to cracked asphalt, the sky itself seeming to shrink between the rising shoulders of the Appalachian Mountains. He followed Mr. Sinclair's directions to a crossroads town that was little more than a post office, a gas station, and a general store with a sagging porch. Leaning against the tailgate of a dark green, 90s-era pickup truck was a man who seemed carved from the same hardwood as the surrounding forest. This had to be Arlo. Arlo, the caretaker, looked to be in his late 60s, with a face mapped by sun and wind. He wore overalls over a thick plaid shirt, and his eyes, set deep under a bushy brow, were skeptical but clear. Beside the man, sitting perfectly still and watching Corbin's approach, was the dog. Gale. He was exactly as Corbin remembered, only older, more settled. He was a large German shepherd, easily 90 pounds, but his color was what held the eye. Not the standard black and tan, but a rare sable, a coat of silver, gray, and white that made him look like a wolf dusted with snow. His eyes were a deep, intelligent amber. He was, as Orville had called him, the valley's ghost. He sat with a profound, patient stillness. Corbin stopped a few feet away. "You're a Corbin," Arlo stated. It was not a question. "I am. You're Arlo?" Arlo nodded, pulling a set of keys from his pocket and holding them out. "Mr. Sinclair called, said you'd be coming. This here's the truck. Orville left it to the farm." He gestured to the green pickup. It was old, with dents along the passenger side, but the tires were new and the engine block looked clean. "And this," he said, patting the dog's broad head, "is Gale." Corbin looked at the dog, and the dog looked back. There was no barking, no tail-thumping excitement, just a quiet mutual assessment. "He's 8 years old," Arlo said, his voice softening slightly. "He's a calm dog, too smart for his own good, maybe. He knows this valley better than I do. He was with Mr. Orville at the end." Corbin absorbed that. He knelt, wincing as his knee popped. He was now eye-level with the shepherd. "Hey, Gale?" Gale's ears flicked forward. He watched Corbin's face, his gaze steady. Corbin extended a hand, palm up. The dog leaned forward, sniffed his knuckles once, and then pushed his cold, wet nose firmly into Corbin's palm. It was a formal introduction, an acceptance. "The stipend account Mr. Sinclair mentioned is active," Arlo said, interrupting the moment. "It's set to pay me for another month to show you the ropes if you want. The road up to the valley is difficult." "I'll manage," Corbin said, standing. "I just want to see the place." Arlo nodded, unsurprised. He looked at the mountains, his expression unreadable. "It's a lot of nothing up there, just wind. And them turbines, Mr. Orville, he loved it, called it his kingdom. But it's a strange place, Mr. Corbin, a lonely place." Corbin took the keys. "I'm used to lonely, Arlo." He opened the passenger door of the truck. Gale, without being told, hopped up and settled onto the bench seat, looking forward as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Corbin got in the driver's side, turned the key, and the old engine fired up with a steady, reliable rumble. He nodded to Arlo, put the truck in gear, and pulled away from the general store. The road Arlo had called difficult was a generous description. It turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to a rutted dirt track that climbed relentlessly. The truck's suspension groaned as it navigated washouts and loose rock. The forest closed in, dense and dark, until finally, after 20 minutes of climbing, the trees fell away. Corbin stopped the truck at the crest of the ridge. Before him lay Howling Wind Valley and the giants. They stood stark against the bruised purple of the approaching dusk. 12 colossal wind turbines marching in a line along the high ridge. They were old, their white paint peeling, streaks of rust weeping from their joints. They were monuments of industry, abandoned on a mountaintop. But the most unsettling part was the silence. The wind was alive up here. It shrieked around the truck's cab, a high, mournful howl that gave the valley its name. It tore at the tall grasses, flattening them in waves. And yet the blades of the turbines were perfectly, utterly still. The sound of the wind, the whump 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 of his memory, was a sound of violent purpose. This was different. The wind howled with all its might, but the giants refused to answer. It was the visual equivalent of a scream with no sound. It was unnatural. Corbin drove slowly past the line of silent sentinels, following the track to a small, solid-looking house built of local stone and thick timber, nestled in the lee of the hill. He parked the truck and got out. The wind hit him immediately, cold and sharp. Gale jumped down and stood beside him, his fur ruffling, but his feet planted firmly on the ground. He belonged here. The house was simple. A front door, a few windows. It was locked. Corbin used the key Arlo had given him. He stepped inside, expecting darkness, expecting cold. He found the lights on. A single lamp was glowing in the living room, and a faint warmth radiated from a baseboard heater. Corbin frowned, confused. He walked over to the light switch and flicked it. It worked. He went back outside, his eyes scanning the property. There were no power lines running up this mountain. The grid did not come here. The turbines were dead. So how? He heard it then. Beneath the shriek of the wind, there was another sound, a lower, steady mechanical hum mixed with the rush of water. Gale was already walking toward it. Corbin followed the dog down a short, worn path behind the house, toward a deep ravine where a fast-moving stream tumbled over rocks. There, half hidden by ferns and a cleverly built wooden shelter, was a small concrete channel. The stream water was diverted, turning a complex, beautifully engineered water wheel, a micro-hydro system. It was Orville's genius. A small, perfect machine running silently, tirelessly, fueled by the valley itself. Corbin stood there for a long time, watching the wheel turn. Orville hadn't relied on his failed monolithic giants. He had relied on the small, constant, hidden stream. Value and price. The valley was harsh, isolated, and haunted by 12 silent, rusting skeletons. It was a kingdom of failed dreams and howling wind. He should have felt tricked. He should have felt the crushing weight of the loneliness Arlo had warned him about. But as he stood there, Gale moved beside him, not asking for anything, just a solid, warm presence pressing lightly against his leg. Corbin put his hand on the dog's broad, strong head. He felt the coarse fur, the steady breathing. He looked out at the strange, broken inheritance, and for the first time since he had come home, the phantom thrum of the helicopter blades in his chest felt 1,000 miles away. He felt the cold wind, the solid ground, and the warmth of the living creature beside him. It was a strange and unexpected feeling. It was safety. Weeks bled into a month. The sharp, vibrant green of late summer hardened into the rusty golds and deep ambers of autumn in the Appalachians. The rhythm of the valley was dictated by 3 things: the sun, the stream, and the wind. Corbin's life fell into that rhythm. He woke before dawn, the air sharp and cold, and his first task was always to check the micro-hydro system. He would clear the intake of fallen leaves and twigs, his hands numb in the icy water, while Gale sat patiently on the bank, a gray ghost in the morning mist. The rest of the day was filled with hard physical labor. The house was solid, but Orville had let the peripherals go. Corbin repaired a sagging section of fence line. He replaced rotting boards on the small porch. He rehung a heavy barn door that had come off its iron track. It was hard, honest work that left his muscles aching and his mind quiet. It left him too tired to dream. Gale was his constant companion. He was not a shadow following Corbin's every step. He was a presence. He would lie 20 yards away, head on his paws, watching Corbin work. He was not a pet demanding attention. He was a partner, a sentry. He seemed to understand that Corbin needed the quiet. Gale patrolled. Every morning and every evening, he would make a wide perimeter of the house and the silent turbines, his gait purposeful, his nose testing the air. He was checking his borders. He was, Corbin realized, a profoundly calm dog, but he was also a guardian. He was guarding the valley, and he was guarding Corbin. The nightmares had not vanished, but they had retreated. The phantom thrum of the helicopter blades, the whump 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 that haunted his quiet moments, was often drowned out by the real physical shriek of the wind or the ache in his shoulders. One afternoon, the wind changed. It had been blowing steadily from the west, a low, steady howl. But as Corbin worked on fixing a loose storm shutter on the second-floor window, the air became strange and pressurized. He was high on an extension ladder, his tool belt heavy on his hips. He was reaching for the final screw when the gust hit. It did not come from the west. It came screaming down the narrow ravine just north of the house, channeled between two walls of granite. It wasn't a howl. It was a high-frequency shriek, an aerodynamic scream that sounded exactly like rotor wash under extreme torque. Corbin froze. The sound. It was the sound of the air breaking apart. Whump, whump, whump. He was no longer on a ladder in North Carolina. He was 5,000 feet above the Korengal Valley, the pave hawk bucking in the unstable air. The pilot's voice, tinny in his helmet, shouted, "RPG! RPG! 3 o'clock!" The lurch of the airframe, the sudden gut-wrenching drop, the smell of cordite and ozone. He could not breathe. His hand clamped the aluminum rung of the ladder, his knuckles white. He was falling. The ground was rushing up. He pressed his face against the wooden siding of the house, his eyes squeezed shut. Not here. Not now. He was pinned, a butterfly on a board, helpless against the memory. Below him, Gale had been lying by the porch. He had heard the wind shriek, but he had also seen his man stop moving. He saw the sudden, death-like stillness. He saw a man who was there 1 second and gone the next. Gale stood. He did not bark at the wind. He did not whine. He walked calmly to the base of the ladder, his amber eyes fixed on Corbin. He pushed his nose against Corbin's boot. Nothing. He pushed his broad, strong head against Corbin's calf. Still nothing. Gale reared back slightly and then pressed his entire 90-pound body firmly against the side of the ladder, a solid, immovable weight. The ladder vibrated with the contact. Corbin flinched. The jolt broke the memory. His eyes snapped open. The smell of cordite was gone. He smelled old wood, damp earth, and the faint, dusty scent of the dog below. He looked down. Gale was looking up, his body braced against the ladder, his tail giving one slow, solid thump. He was not panicked. He was waiting. Corbin's breath came out in a ragged gasp. He leaned his forehead against the rung, his heart hammering. "I'm okay, boy," he whispered. "I'm okay. I'm coming down." His legs were shaking so badly he almost missed the last rung. The moment his boots hit the grass, he slid down the wall and sat hard on the ground, pulling his knees to his chest. Gale immediately moved in. He did not lick or jump. He walked directly to Corbin, pushed his head under Corbin's limp arm, and shoved his way onto Corbin's lap, settling his full weight against Corbin's chest. He was too big to be a lapdog, but he did not seem to care. He pressed his flank hard against Corbin's stomach, then turned and rested his heavy chin firmly on Corbin's thigh. Corbin wrapped his arms around the dog's thick ruff, burying his face in the coarse, clean-smelling fur. He felt the dog's steady, slow heartbeat against his own erratic one. He felt the solid weight, the living warmth. Gale was an anchor. The helicopter was gone. He was on the ground. He was safe. The dog was telling him so. He sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing, until his heart stopped feeling like it was trying to escape his chest. That evening, as the wind died down to a murmur, Corbin felt a new resolve. He needed to understand this place. He needed to understand the man who had left it to him. He went into the small room Orville had used as a study. It was not a farmer's office. It was the mind of his uncle laid bare. One wall was covered in old electronic equipment, oscilloscopes, signal generators, and reel-to-reel tape machines. Another was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. Corbin had glanced at it before, assuming they were manuals. Now he looked closer. He pulled one book out. It was not a book. It was a thick, cloth-bound journal, the cover embossed with gold lettering. Howling Wind Valley, Acoustic Resonance Journal, 1998. Corbin opened it. It was filled, page after page with meticulous handwritten calculations, diagrams of sound waves, notes on frequencies, vibrations, and harmonics. He saw notes in the margins. Wind at 40 medium 1500 Hz spike. Source, unknown. He pulled out another. Geological survey. Bedrock composition. This one was filled with maps of the valley, cross-sections of the rock strata, and notes on the density of the granite foundation. It was not a wind farm. Not really. It was a listening station. Corbin looked at Gale, who had followed him inside and was now asleep at his feet, his breathing a soft, rhythmic puff. He realized Gale was the first part of the lesson. The dog was not just a companion. He was an anchor, a creature designed to detect imbalance and bring a person back to earth. Corbin looked at the journals. Orville, it seemed, had been trying to do the same thing, not by listening to the wind, but by listening to the ground beneath it. The discovery of Orville's journals changed Corbin's relationship with the valley. The work on the fences and the house was no longer just a distraction, it was a holding pattern. The real mystery was not the silent turbines, but the ground they were anchored to. The journals, filled with acoustic data and geological maps, all pointed to one place, the large, cavernous barn that sat squat and windowless beside the main house. It was the only building on the property large enough to house the practice that went with Orville's theory. A cold front had moved in, and the wind had a sharper, icy edge. Corbin zipped his leather jacket, the old worn brown leather cracking in protest. He slid the heavy barn door open, its wheels scraping on the iron track. The interior was vast, dark, and cold. It smelled of dust, old oil, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone, like a storm had been bottled up inside. High in the gloom, rafters crisscrossed the ceiling. But the center of the barn was not filled with hay or tractors. It was dominated by a machine. It was a central control panel, arranged in a deep horseshoe, just like something from a 1970s science fiction film. It was dead, cold to the touch. The panels were covered in switches, dials, and gauges, all labeled with technical shorthand Corbin did not understand. In the center, 3 large oscilloscope screens stared blankly, their glass faces dark green and opaque. Corbin ran his fingers over the cold metal. This was it. This was the heart of Orville's operation. This was what the journals were referencing. He tried a few switches. Nothing happened. The entire console was as silent and lifeless as the turbines it was supposedly connected to. Gale, who had followed him in, walked the perimeter of the room. His claws clicked softly on the concrete floor. He sniffed at a stack of old tires, at a workbench covered in strange-looking tools, and then he came to the center of the room, to the open space where an operator's chair would have sat before the console. And he stopped. Corbin was tracing a thick bundle of cables that ran from the back of the console into a trench in the floor. "It's all dead, boy," Corbin muttered, frustration seeping in. Orville built this whole theater, and then just let it die. He heard a sound, a low, soft woof. He turned. Gale was standing in the operator's space, perfectly still, his head bowed low, his ears pinned back. He looked exactly as he had in the yard just before the panic attack, but this was different. He was not listening to Corbin. He was listening to the floor. "What is it, Gale?" Gale whined. It was a high, thin sound of anxiety that Corbin had never heard him make. He was a calm dog, a silent anchor. This sound was wrong. Then came the growl. It was not the aggressive, teeth-baring growl of a dog facing a threat. It was a deep, chest-vibrating rumble, a sound of profound unease. It was directed not at Corbin, not at the door, but straight down at the floorboards beneath his feet. Corbin went still. "Easy, boy. What's down there? A raccoon? A possum?" Gale ignored him. He took a step back, lowered his head again, and then, with a sharp snort, he began to scratch. His thick black claws raked across one specific plank of wood. It was an old, thick piece of oak, right in the center of the horseshoe. Scrape, scrape, whine. "Gale, stop." The dog stopped, looked at Corbin with an intensity that was almost frightening, let out a single, sharp bark, and scratched again, harder this time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Corbin stared. The dog was frantic, obsessed. This was not Gale. This was not the placid, centered creature that had become his Moneo. This was a dog with a mission. He walked over and pushed Gale gently to the side. Okay, I see it. Gale paced in a tight circle, panting, his amber eyes locked on the floorboard. Corbin knelt. He pressed his hand against the wood. It was just wood. Cold. Solid. He rapped his knuckles on it. It sounded just as solid as the planks next to it. He looked at Gale, whose entire body was now quivering. He remembered the ladder. He remembered the feeling of falling, the smell of cordite, and the solid, unwavering pressure of Gale's body, bringing him back. The dog had perceived a danger Corbin could not, a danger inside his own mind. Now, Gale was perceiving something else, something under the floor. "You're not a ratting dog, are you, boy?" Corbin said quietly. "This is something else." He trusted the dog. He trusted him more than he trusted his own mind on most days. He stood up and went to the workbench. He found a long, heavy-duty pry bar. He returned to the spot, jammed the flat end of the bar into the thin crack between the planks, and put his full weight on it. The old wood groaned. Gale barked again, a sharp sound of encouragement. Corbin repositioned the bar and heaved. There was a loud crack as the nails, rusted and deep, finally surrendered their hold. The plank popped up on one end. Gale surged forward, shoving his nose into the gap, sniffing frantically. "Back, Gale. Let me look." Corbin pulled the heavy plank free and tossed it aside. Beneath it was not dirt or a crawl space. There was a small, square, hollowed-out area, a secret compartment. His heart began to beat in that slow, heavy way it did before a mission. He knelt, his knees cracking on the concrete. Inside the hollow, resting on a bed of what looked like old, moldy felt, were two objects. He reached in and pulled out the first. It was a portable cassette recorder, a professional-grade model from the 1980s, heavy and black. It was caked in dust. Beside it was a single cassette tape in its clear plastic case. He picked up the tape. There was no studio label, just a strip of simple white tape on the spine, with two words handwritten in Orville's spiky, precise engineering script. First Symphony. Corbin stared at the tape. A symphony? He looked up at the massive dead console, built not for music, but for something else. He looked at the labyrinth of cables disappearing into the ground. He looked at Gale. The dog was now sitting calmly, his panting slowed. He looked at Corbin, then at the tape, and gave one single thump of his tail against the floor. His job was done. Corbin stood up, the heavy recorder in one hand, the small tape in the other. He felt like he was holding the key to a door he never knew existed. "A symphony," Corbin said, his voice rough. He looked at his calm gray companion. "All right, Gale, let's go back to the house. Let's see what you wanted us to hear." Corbin sat in Orville's study, the small, cold room that felt more like a laboratory than a den. The journals were piled on the desk, silent stacks of data he could not yet interpret. Gale lay at his feet, his breathing a soft, rhythmic presence in the quiet house. In his hands, Corbin held the 1980s-era cassette recorder. It was heavy, a solid block of black metal and plastic. He had found 4 C-cell batteries in a drawer, still in their packaging, a testament to Orville's meticulous preparation. He clicked the tape, First Symphony, into the compartment. He hesitated. He felt a strange reluctance, the same feeling he got just before opening a door he knew was booby-trapped. He was about to listen to a voice from the dead. He pressed the play button. There was a click, a long, abrasive hiss of blank tape, and then a voice. Log entry, October 14th, 2009. Corbin's breath caught. It was Orville. His voice was thinner than Corbin remembered, drier, like rustling leaves, but the precision was unmistakable. "If someone is listening to this," the voice continued, "it means they found the floorboard, and it means Gale, or a dog much like him, showed you. I always trusted the dogs. They hear the things we've forced ourselves to ignore. Gale's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but he did not wake. You're likely in the barn, or perhaps the house, looking out at my grand folly. The Howling Wind Valley Farm, a spectacular $12 million failure. Corbin leaned closer to the small speaker. It was a sound idea in theory, Orville's voice mused, a phantom echo in the small room. But the wind here? It's too chaotic. The ridges create a turbulence, a shear that the turbines were never designed for. They spent more energy fighting the air than harvesting it. They were loud, so loud. I wasn't harnessing the wind, I was in a shouting match with it, and the valley always wins. There was a pause, the sound of a page turning. But failure is just data, and the data told me I was listening to the wrong thing. The real project isn't in the sky, it is in the earth. Corbin looked down at the journals, at the geological maps and seismic charts. The foundations, Orville's voice said, as if reading his mind. That is the secret. When the construction crews drilled the bores for the turbine foundations, they went deep, hundreds of feet, straight into the bedrock, the granite spine of the mountain. After the farm officially went bust, I repurposed the bores. I had them pull the generators. I told them I was converting the towers into a telecommunications relay. They believed me. They took the money and left. Corbin pictured the silent, rusting giants. They're not antennae for the air, Orville said, his voice dropping, gaining intensity. They are antennae for the earth. I dropped custom-shielded, ultra-sensitive geophones down each and every bore, 12 of them, anchored directly to the bedrock. Geophones, seismic sensors. The turbines, Orville's voice crackled, are just the relay stations. That's why they must be still. They must be silent. The wind you hear, that's just noise. The symphony, the real symphony, is the vibration of the mountain itself. That's why I called this tape First Symphony. It is the first recording I ever made of the valley breathing. A new sound emerged from the speaker, beneath the hiss and the voice. It was a low, subsonic vibration. A whump, whump, whump that was so deep, Corbin felt it in his chest more than he heard it with his ears. It was not the sound of helicopter blades. It was the sound of the planet. Gale, deep in sleep, let out a soft whine, his paws twitching, recognizing the sound he had heard through the floorboards. It's the sound of the granite settling, Orville whispered. The sound of the aquifer moving 300 feet beneath the house. The sound of the earth's slow, steady pulse. The sound was hypnotic, terrifying, and beautiful. Why? Orville's voice asked, anticipating Corbin's next thought. Why do all this? Why spend a fortune to listen to a rock? The speaker hissed. Corbin could hear the old man take a deep, shaky breath. His name was David, Orville said, his voice suddenly fragile. My best friend, my colleague. We were in Washington State, back in 1980, scouting a location for a new hydroelectric project. We were near a dam. The ground was stable. All the engineers said so. We were standing on a ridge, drinking coffee from a thermos. And the ground, the old man's voice faltered. It wasn't a roar. It was a sigh. The whole hillside just sighed. It let go. He was there 1 second, and the next, just dust. They never found him. 10 million tons of rock and mud, it just sighed, and he was gone. The cassette recorder hummed. I became obsessed, Orville said, his voice flat and hard. Obsessed with prediction. We watch the skies for hurricanes. We watch the oceans for tsunamis. But who listens to the ground before it breaks? Who listens for the sigh? Corin did not move. He was seeing a different ridge, a ridge in Afghanistan. He smelled the jet fuel, the ozone, the hot dust. He heard the radio crackle. Man down! We are taking fire. His entire life as a rescue pilot, his medals, his nightmares, they were all based on reaction. He was the man who arrived after the explosion. He was the man who flew into the firefight after it had started. He was the man who pulled men from the wreckage after the crash. His entire existence was defined by arriving too late, by being the cleanup crew for a catastrophe that had already happened. His PTSD was not the fear of dying. It was the trauma of failure, the agony of being 5 minutes too late, 100 feet too high, 1 second too slow. It was the trauma of reaction. I wanted a warning system. Orville's voice crackled, pulling Corbin back to the study. I wanted to hear the symphony change, to hear the single sour note, the tiny fracture before the catastrophe. I wanted a chance to tell David to step back. Corbin looked at his own hands. They were steady. He understood. This inheritance, this burden. It was not a broken farm. It was not a pile of rocks. It was not a valuable mineral deposit, as Gavin believed. It was a chance. It was the one thing he had craved his entire adult life. It was a mission, not to clean up the mess, but to see it coming. Orville had not left him a place to hide from the world. He had left him a post to watch it. The tape clicked, and Orville's voice returned for one last log entry. The system is dead, of course. I shut it all down when I got sick. The console in the barn is just a husk. The heart is locked away. The key is not in the house. It's a physical key, a tuning fork, the one I used to calibrate the original geophones. It's hidden. You must find the place where the wind sings. The tape hissed for another 30 seconds, and then, with a loud final clack, it stopped. The silence of the room rushed back in. Corbin sat in the dark, the old man's words echoing, "Where the wind sings." Gale, sensing the change in the room, lifted his head and let out a soft yawn, looking up at Corbin. Corbin reached down and scratched the dog's gray ruff, his mind clear for the first time in years. The restlessness, the anxiety, the whump, whump, whump. It was still there. But it was no longer a phantom. It had a name. It had a purpose. "He wants us to find a tuning fork, boy," Corbin whispered. "He wants us to turn the music back on." The tape's final click echoed in Corbin's mind long after the sound died. The place where the wind sings. He had spent the better part of a week poring over Orville's journals, cross-referencing acoustic maps with geological surveys. He walked the perimeter of the valley, his eyes scanning the 12 silent giants, searching for a clue. There were no obvious markers, no cryptic symbols etched into the weathered steel. Orville was too clever for that. The key, the tuning fork, was hidden, and the only clue was a poetic phrase that could mean anything. Corbin was not a poet. He was a man of concrete, of physics, of hard reality. He understood flight trajectories and structural integrity. He understood the force needed to breach a door or the precise coordinates of an extraction point. The place where the wind sings. What did that even mean in a valley where the wind always sang, a cacophony of howls and shrieks? One blustery afternoon, Corbin stood at the base of the tallest turbine, turbine number 7. It was the highest point on the ridge, exposed to the full, relentless force of the Appalachian gales. He closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind, to simply listen. But all he heard was the same roaring chaos he had heard 100 times. Gale, as usual, was with him. The dog had been restless all week, his ears flicking, his head often tilted as if listening to something Corbin could not perceive. Today, however, Gale's behavior was different. He was not just listening, he was acting. He paced in tight circles around the massive concrete base of turbine number 7. His nose was to the ground, sniffing frantically at the cracks in the weathered concrete. He whined, a low, urgent sound. "What is it, boy?" Corbin asked, pulling his gaze from the sky to the dog. Gale stopped pacing. He pushed his nose into a narrow fissure in the concrete, where the base met the exposed bedrock. It was just a seam, filled with lichen and dirt. But Gale began to scratch at it, a desperate, rapid digging motion. "There's nothing there, Gale," Corbin said, kneeling. "Just rock. This whole valley sings." Gale paused his frantic scratching, lifted his head, and gave a sharp, indignant bark. He looked at Corbin with an expression that plainly said, "You are missing it, human." Then he dropped his head and began to dig again, with renewed fervor. He used his front paws, then his nose, pushing away small rocks and loose dirt. Corbin watched him. Gale wasn't just reacting to a scent. He was focused, obsessed. This was the same kind of driven energy he had shown when he scratched at the floorboard in the barn. Gale was not searching for a squirrel. He was searching for something Orville had hidden. Corbin stood up and walked a few yards away to a cluster of large, exposed granite boulders. They were ancient, worn smooth by eons of wind and rain. The wind here was ferocious, funneled between the house-sized rocks, creating a deafening roar. He remembered Orville's words from the tape, "The place where the wind sings." He closed his eyes again, trying to block out the overwhelming noise. What if Orville hadn't meant sings in a chaotic, roaring sense? What if he meant sings in a more precise, a more resonant way, like a musical note? He pressed his ear against the cold, hard granite. He heard nothing but the muffled roar of the wind, the vibrations of the rock. He opened his eyes, and then he saw it. Almost directly beneath the largest, most exposed boulder, where the wind hit it hardest, was a small, almost invisible fissure. It wasn't just a crack. It was a narrow, perfectly straight seam in the granite, perhaps 2 inches wide and a foot long. It was perfectly camouflaged by lichen and moss, but it was too geometrically precise to be natural. It looked like a hidden slot. It was exactly the kind of thing Orville would have designed. A perfect deception. Corbin walked back to Gale, who had paused his digging and was now watching him intently, head cocked. "You found the general area, didn't you, boy?" Corbin said, kneeling and rubbing Gale's head. "You led me to the tallest tower, to the windiest spot. You got me to start listening." Gale thumped his tail once, slowly, solidly, as if to say, "About time you caught on." Corbin walked to the rock and knelt. He ran his fingers along the almost invisible fissure. He used a small, flat rock to scrape away the moss and lichen. Beneath it, the seam became clearer. It was an opening, and at its very center there was a tiny, perfectly square indentation, no bigger than Corbin's thumb. It was a keyhole, but not for a standard key. "A tuning fork," Corbin whispered. "Orville's last clue from the tape." "The one I used to calibrate the original geophones?" Corbin stood up, scanning the ground. He had looked at the keyhole, but not the tool. Orville had said, "A physical key, a tuning fork." He wasn't looking for a metal key. He was looking for the tuning fork. He looked back at Gale, who had now come to sit patiently beside him, watching the rock face. The dog wasn't digging anymore. He was simply waiting. He had led Corbin to the door. Now Corbin had to find the handle. Corbin suddenly remembered something from Orville's older journals, a passage he had skimmed days ago. Orville was describing the initial setup of his geophone system, how he used precise acoustic frequencies to test the sensors. He had mentioned a special custom-made tuning fork calibrated to a specific geological resonance. And then the detail. "I keep the master calibrator secured by the console. For safety. But the field key, that's always with me. A reminder of the valley's true song. With him." Corbin looked at the rock again. He looked at Gale. He thought of Orville, the eccentric engineer, always carrying some strange gadget. He looked around the base of the rock, not on the rock, with him. It was then that he saw it. A small, rusted, cylindrical tin can, half buried in the dirt at the very base of the tallest rock, almost completely obscured by overgrown weeds and a fallen branch. It had been there for decades, merging with the landscape. He reached down and pulled it free. It was an old tobacco tin, severely rusted, but still intact. He pried it open. Inside, cushioned by decades-old dry moss, lay a single, gleaming object. It was a tuning fork. It was made of brass, dark with age, but polished smooth in certain spots. It was about 8 inches long, with 2 slender prongs and a thick base. But this was no ordinary tuning fork. The base was intricately carved, and at its very end was a small, perfectly square peg. the peg that matched the square indentation in the rock. Corbin stared at it, a wave of profound understanding washing over him. The wind sang here, yes, but not randomly. It sang a specific frequency, a resonance with the rock itself. And Orville had crafted a tool, a key, that embodied that song. He held the tuning fork in his hand. It felt cold, heavy, ancient, and alive with purpose. He looked at Gale. The dog watched him, his amber eyes calm and full of knowing. Corbin slid the square peg of the tuning fork into the matching indentation in the rock. It fit perfectly. He turned it. There was a faint, mechanical click from deep within the rock, a sound of gears moving, of ancient mechanisms awakening. Then, with a low, deep rumble, a section of the granite face slid inward, revealing a dark, cavernous opening. A solid, steel-reinforced hatch, perfectly camouflaged, had opened from the heart of the mountain. It was not a hidden treasure chest. It was a hidden door. Corbin stood up, his heart pounding. The air rushing from the opening smelled of damp earth, old metal, and the faint, unmistakable tang of electricity. Gale nudged his hand. He was ready. "All right, boy," Corbin whispered, looking into the darkness. "Let's go see what's inside Orville's secret." Corbin stood at the threshold of the darkness. The heavy, reinforced hatch he had opened with the tuning fork, the hatch he had opened in the rock, was a dark maw, breathing air that smelled of damp stone, ozone, and cold, sleeping electronics. Gale nudged his hand, impatient. The dog was not afraid. This was part of the valley. It belonged. Corbin pulled a small flashlight from his jacket pocket, the one he used for checking the hydrogenerator at night. He clicked it on. The beam cut into the black. It was not a cave. It was a tunnel. The walls were smooth, reinforced concrete, and a thick bundle of shielded cables ran along the ceiling. He had stepped out of the raw, howling wilderness and into a military-grade bunker. He and Gale walked down the tunnel for 30 feet. It ended at another heavy steel door, but this one had a simple latch. He opened it. The room was large, circular, and lit by a single, low-wattage emergency bulb, which cast long, eerie shadows. The air hummed. It was not the barn. The control panel he had found in the barn, the one Gale had scratched beneath, was a relic, a prop, a decoy. This was the heart. It was a laboratory built deep into the granite spine of the mountain. In the center sat a newer, more complex version of the console, angled toward a single, massive curved screen that was currently dead black. Racks of servers stood silent against one wall. And against the far wall, Corbin saw the source of the hum. It was a bank of power inverters and batteries, connected to a thick, heavy armored conduit, labeled Hydro Main. Orville had not just powered his house with the micro-hydro system. He had run a dedicated, underground line to this secret facility. The hum Corbin heard was the sound of the batteries, kept on a perpetual trickle charge by the stream. The system was not dead. It was sleeping. "He built all this," Corbin whispered, his voice sounding small in the concrete room. Gale walked to the center of the room and lay down, as if he had been here 100 times before. Corbin moved to the main console. It was dark, but he could feel a faint warmth. He looked for a switch, a button, a place to start. He saw nothing. It was a smooth, seamless panel. Then he saw the slot. It was right in the center, just below the main screen. A small, brass-lined opening, perfectly matching the shape of the tuning fork he still held in his hand. He looked at the fork. The key? He remembered the tape. "The one I used to calibrate the original geophones." It was not just a key. It was a trigger. Corbin inserted the brass tuning fork into the slot. It clicked in, a perfect, satisfying fit. But nothing happened. He frowned. He thought back. A tuning fork. You do not just turn it, you strike it. He placed his finger on the tip of one of the brass prongs, pulled it back slightly, and let it go. A single, pure, high-frequency note filled the room. It was not loud, but it was so clear, so penetrating, that the air itself seemed to vibrate. The note held, "Beep," and the room answered. A series of relays clicked, one after another, like dominoes falling. The server racks lit up, rows of green lights blinking in the dark. The main screen above the console flickered, not to life, but to a dim, gray standby. And then the sound. A deep, powerful whump, whump, whump. It was the sound from the tape, the first symphony. But it was not a recording. It was live. It filled the room, coming from hidden speakers, a subsonic pulse that Corbin felt in his teeth, in the soles of his boots. It was the valley, breathing. Corbin stared at the screen. It was no longer blank. A grid appeared, and then, in the center, a single word. Calibrating. One by one, 12 green lights appeared on the console, labeled Turbine 1, Turbine 2, all the way to Turbine 12. The geophones, the silent giants. They were waking up. They were reporting in. The data began to stream. The screen, which he thought was a simple monitor, was not. It was a complex, multi-layered display. The grid lines began to bend, to warp. They were forming a shape. A wireframe image appeared. It was the valley. It was a detailed, three-dimensional, semi-transparent map of Howling Wind Valley, from the crust down to the bedrock. He could see the ridge, the house, the stream. But he could also see under it. He saw the granite foundations. He saw the dark, moving shape of the aquifer, the hidden river beneath the ground. He saw thin, red lines spiderwebbing through the rock. Fault lines, microfractures, the stress points that Orville had been watching. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing Corbin had ever seen. It was a living X-ray of the Earth. He was not just on the mountain. He was inside it. He could see its bones. He understood in that moment the true scope of Orville's genius and his obsession. He ran his hand over the console, the metal now warm and alive. His fingers brushed against something, a small metal plaque, bolted just below the tuning fork's slot. It was almost worn smooth. He leaned in, using his flashlight to read the small, precise text engraved on it. It was not a technical label. It was a final order, a transfer of command. Use this to listen and protect. Never let it fall into the hands of those who only want to dig. Corbin read the words twice. Listen and protect. A mission he understood. Those who only want to dig. He thought instantly of his cousin Gavin, the man who saw the valley not as a living thing, but as a price tag. The man who wanted to know what valuable thing Orville had hidden. Gavin thought he had inherited a worthless pile of rocks. Orville had left Corbin an observatory. Corbin looked at Gale. The gray dog was watching him, his amber eyes reflecting the soft green light of the console. He was no longer just a dog. He was the first soldier at a new listening post. Corbin was no longer a refugee from his past. He was no longer reacting. He was on watch. Corbin stood in the green glow of the bunker, his hand resting on the console. He was watching the Earth breathe. The 3D map on the main screen showed the slow, deep pulse of the aquifer, the subtle seismic hum of the mountain. It was the most profound, peaceful, and alive thing he had ever witnessed. He finally understood Orville's obsession. This was the ultimate listening post, a sanctuary built to protect, to listen. Gale, who had been lying calmly at his feet, suddenly stood. His head snapped toward the concrete tunnel leading to the surface, and a low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Corbin whispered. Gale ignored him, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the tunnel. The growl deepened. It was not the anxious whine he'd used at the floorboard. This was the sound of a guardian identifying a threat. Corbin turned back to the screen. The peaceful, pulsing map was no longer calm. In the upper right quadrant, near the access road, new vibrations appeared. They were sharp, mechanical, and unnatural. They were vehicles. The geophones were so sensitive they could pick up the rumble of engines moving on the ridge. Corbin's blood ran cold. He looked at the plaque on the console. Never let it fall into the hands of those who only want to dig. It was not a philosophical warning. It was a prophecy. "They're here," Corbin said. He found what looked like a shutdown sequence on the touch-sensitive panel. He initiated it. The massive screen went dark, the server lights blinked from green to amber, and the deep whump-whump-whump of the earth faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the battery backups. He grabbed the brass tuning fork from its slot. The system was asleep. "Come on, Gale." They moved quickly through the tunnel. Corbin reset the mechanism from the inside. The heavy, rock-faced hatch slid shut with a pneumatic sigh and a heavy thud, sealing the bunker. He camouflaged the seam with the dead branch he had moved earlier. By the time they walked the 50 yards back toward the house, the sound of diesel engines was echoing off the mountainside. Two heavy-duty, mud-splattered pickup trucks, both equipped with off-road tires and work lights, were pulling to a stop in the clearing by Corbin's truck. The passenger door of the lead truck opened, and Gavin swung out. He was dressed for the wilderness, or at least his expensive catalog's version of it. He wore brand-new, stiff hiking boots, a bright red down-filled jacket that looked puffy and ridiculous, and a pair of mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He looked like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn. 3 other men climbed out of the trucks. They were not tourists. They wore worn work clothes, heavy boots, and hard expressions. They looked like they spent their lives breaking rock and bending metal. This was the survey team. "Corbin!" Gavin called out, his voice full of false cheer. He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the valley. "Look at this place. Still standing. I'm impressed." Corbin stopped 20 feet away, his hands loosely at his sides. Gale stood beside him, a statue of gray muscle. The dog was perfectly silent, his body rigid, his amber eyes locked on Gavin. "You're trespassing, Gavin," Corbin said, his voice flat. "Am I?" Gavin laughed, pulling off his sunglasses. His eyes were sharp and greedy. "I prefer to think of it as an estate inspection. You can keep the house, cousin. You can keep the dog. You can even keep these ridiculous rusty lawn ornaments." He waved a dismissive hand at the silent turbines. "I'm here," Gavin said, "for what's underneath." Corbin had to protect the bunker. He had to protect the mission. He played dumb. "There's nothing underneath, Gavin. It's just rock. I've seen the journals. Orville was an acoustical engineer, not a miner." Gavin's smile was razor-thin. He walked closer, stopping just out of Corbin's reach. He clearly noticed the protective stance of the dog. "Don't play stupid, Corbin. It doesn't suit you. Or maybe it does. Did you really think the old man was just listening to the wind?" Gavin tapped the side of his head. "Years ago, back in 2017, when I made my first serious offer on this valley, Orville turned me down flat. He said the land was busy. I thought he was senile. But I don't risk 7-figure investments without doing my homework." He pointed a gloved finger at the ground. "I hired a private firm. They ran a full geomagnetic survey of this entire ridge using a high-altitude drone. And you know what they found?" Gavin leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Anomalies. Massive, off-the-charts magnetic anomalies. A signature so big, my geologist said he'd only seen it once before." "You know what it looks like, Corbin? It looks like one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in North America." Corbin's mind raced. He saw it instantly. Gavin hadn't seen minerals. He had seen Orville's system. He had seen the hundreds of yards of shielded cable, the deep-bored geophone casings, the reinforced concrete of the bunker itself. He had seen a massive metallic signature and mistaken it for a natural resource. "You saw junk, Gavin," Corbin said, keeping his voice steady. "Orville was an engineer. He buried equipment. You're chasing shadows." "We'll see," Gavin said, his smile widening. "That's why I brought the team." He gestured to the trucks. The 3 men had lowered the tailgate and were assembling a piece of equipment. It was a portable, gas-powered, mini drilling rig, a core sampler. "They're just going to take a few samples," Gavin said. "We'll drill a few cores, confirm what I already know. And then," he clapped his hands together, "I will have my lawyers tie this ridiculous will up in court so fast your head will spin. This valley has a price, Corbin, and I am here today to find out exactly what it is." Orville's words echoed in Corbin's mind. Value and price. "You're not drilling on this land," Corbin said. It was not a request. Gavin laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Try and stop me. What are you going to do? Sick your wolf on us?" "I think not." One of the surveyors, a broad-shouldered man with a grizzled beard, stepped forward. "Look, mister," he said, his voice rough. "We're just here to do a job. We've got a contract. Don't make it complicated." Corbin looked at the three men, then at Gavin. He was one man with one dog on an isolated mountaintop. There was no cell service to call the sheriff. Even if he could, they would be hours away. He could not win a physical fight. "This is illegal," Corbin said, his last remaining card. "It's a family land dispute," Gavin retorted, waving him off. "I have a legal stake. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got work to do." He turned his back on Corbin and pointed toward the ridge, in the exact direction of the hidden bunker. "Let's start there." The anomaly was strongest on that rise. The men began pushing the rig on its wheeled cart, heading directly for the camouflaged hatch. Corbin stood frozen, helpless. He had failed. He had failed to protect it. Gale whined, a low, frustrated sound, and looked up at him. Corbin looked at the dog, then at the men's backs. He could not stop them with force. He remembered his training. When you cannot stop the enemy, you watch them. You gather intelligence. You wait for your moment. He remembered the screen in the bunker. He turned, his face a mask of stone. "Go on, Gale." He and the dog walked away, not toward the house, but back toward the cluster of rocks near turbine number 7. Gavin watched him go, a look of triumphant mockery on his face. "That's right. Go back to the porch." "Good dog." Corbin ignored him. He reached the hidden hatch. He waited until the survey team was cresting the ridge, their backs to him. He pulled the branch away. He used the tuning fork. The heavy door hissed open. "Stay!" he commanded Gale, who sat just outside the entrance, a silent gray guardian. Corbin slipped into the darkness. He sealed the door behind him. He ran down the tunnel, his boots echoing. He got to the console, slid the tuning fork into its slot, and struck it. The pure note sang. The relays clicked. The system came alive. On the main screen, the 3D map of the valley reappeared, and this time, pulsing in bright, angry red, were 4 new vibrations on the surface. The diggers. He had failed to stop them, but Orville had left him the tools to watch them and to listen. Inside the bunker, the world was green light and the low, deep pulse of the earth. Corbin sat before the console, a watchman in the heart of the mountain. On the 3D screen, he tracked the 4 bright, angry red signatures of Gavin's team. They were moving, pushing their wheeled drilling rig up the ridge, heading directly toward the coordinates Gavin had pointed out. Outside, the wind, which had been a steady howl, was rising in pitch. Even through the concrete and rock, Corbin could feel the barometric pressure dropping. The air in the bunker felt heavy, static. He looked for a weather feed. Of course, Orville had one. On a secondary panel, he found it, a direct link to the National Weather Service. The screen was a wash of dark red and yellow. A massive storm front, a low-pressure system of historic proportions, was colliding with the Appalachian Range. And at the center of the warning, flashing in stark white letters, were the words, "Flash flood warning. Catastrophic flooding possible. Seek higher ground immediately." Corbin's blood ran cold. Higher ground. They were on the highest ground for miles, but a valley was a bowl, a trap. He looked back at the seismic map. The 4 red dots had stopped. They had reached their destination. A spot on the 3D map Corbin saw was labeled Cliff A. It was a sheer rock face that formed one side of the narrowest part of the valley just above the main stream. "They're not stopping," Corbin whispered. "He's not stopping." A new vibration appeared on the map. It was sharp, rhythmic, and unnatural. It was not the rumble of an engine. It was the high-frequency shriek of a drill bit biting into rock. Gavin was actually doing it. In the middle of a developing catastrophic storm, his greed was so absolute that he had ordered his men to begin drilling. Corbin watched in horror. The drill's vibration was a neon yellow spike on the screen, and it was aimed directly at one of the thin, spider-webbing red lines he had seen earlier. A pre-existing microfracture. Orville's system was so sensitive, Corbin could watch in real time as the drill hammered at the mountain's weak point. He needed to hear what was happening outside. He searched the console. There had to be an external microphone. He found the switch labeled atmospheric and flipped it. The bunker was instantly filled with a deafening, terrifying roar. It was the sound of the sky ripping apart. The wind was a solid wall of sound, punctuated by the sharp crack of rain, not falling, but being driven horizontally against the rock. And beneath it, another sound, a high-pitched metallic whine. The drill. Corbin was about to shut the sound off when he heard it. It was a long, desperate, soul-tearing howl. It cut through the storm's roar with pure, animal terror. It was Gale. Corbin had left him outside the hatch. He was the guardian. But this was not the growl of a guardian. It was not the bark of a sentry. It was the sound of a creature that could feel the world breaking. Corbin looked back at the main screen. The thin red line of the microfracture was no longer a static line. It was flashing, and it was spreading. On the 3D map, tiny new red lines were branching off the main one, like cracks in a sheet of ice. The drill was not just drilling, it was acting as a high-frequency hammer, shattering the integrity of the already unstable cliff face. Gale howled again, a sound of profound existential dread. He could feel it. He was standing on the rock that was about to betray him. "He can feel it," Corbin whispered, his hands gripping the edge of the console. "GHE knows." Corbin's mind raced, his old training as a pilot kicking in. Assess the threat, analyze the terrain, find the exit. The exit. His eyes flew to the 3D map. He zoomed out. He traced the path of the stream, the one that powered his generator. He saw it snake through the valley, gathering water from a dozen smaller tributaries. All of it, flowed toward one single, narrow point. A gorge. The gorge that was the only drainage point for the entire 300-acre bowl of the valley. The walls of that gorge were Cliff A and the cliff face opposite it. Corbin stared at the screen, the terrible, catastrophic realization crystallizing. Gavin was not just drilling into a rock. He was drilling into the keystone of a natural dam. If Cliff A collapsed, it would fall directly into the gorge. It would block the exit, the flash flood warning, the torrential rain, all that water. Where would it go? It would have nowhere to go. It would fill the valley. It would fill it like a bathtub. The house, the barn, the silent turbines, the bunker itself. Gavin, in his blind, greedy search for price, was about to execute them all. He was turning the valley, Orville's sanctuary, into a tomb. A cold, dark, watery tomb. On the screen, the drill whined on. The cracks spread. Corbin looked at the flashing warning. Catastrophic flooding possible. It was no longer possible. It was inevitable. He had spent his life as a rescue pilot, reacting to disasters. Orville had given him a tool to predict them. And now he was watching one unfold, minute by minute, second by second, in the cold green light of a dead man's observatory. He had failed to stop it. The diggers were here. He looked at the map, at the flashing red lines. The collapse was not minutes away. It was seconds. He had to get Gale. He had to warn them. He slammed his hand on the console, shutting down the atmospheric sound. The bunker was silent again, save for the hum of the servers. He grabbed the tuning fork, his hand shaking. He was no longer a watchman. He was a combat rescue officer again, and the clock was ticking. The 3D map on the console was a death sentence. Cliff A was flashing a critical, terrifying red. The cracks were spreading. The howl from Gale, captured by the external mic, was a sound of pure, primal knowledge. The mountain was breaking. Corbin's first instinct, the one buried deep by years of trauma, was to freeze. The whump, whump, whump of his memory, the smell of cordite, the sensation of falling. But the map in front of him was not a memory. It was the future. He was not reacting. He was predicting. He forced his eyes away from the flashing red of Cliff A. He could not stop it. He had to accept it. His mission was not to stop the disaster, but to survive it. He zoomed the 3D map out, his mind racing, scanning the entire topography of the bowl. The water would come. It would fill the valley. Unless... He found it, on the opposite side of the valley, a mile away. A second weak point, labeled Cliff B. It was a different geological formation, not unstable granite, but a thick, ancient wall of shale and compacted earth. It was currently blocking another, smaller ravine, but Orville's seismic data showed it was rotten, structurally compromised. It was a cork in a bottle. He could not stop the main floodgate from closing, but he could blast a new one open. He remembered Orville's journals, sketches of road-clearing supplies, blasting caps, dynamite, stored in the old reinforced explosives locker behind the main barn. The plan formed, cold and clear, a pilot's checklist. 1. Get Gale. 2. Get the liabilities, Gavin and his men, to the safest structure, the main barn. 3. Get the explosives. 4. Get to Cliff B. 5. Create a new exit. He slammed the shutdown sequence. The green screen went dark. He grabbed the tuning fork, ran down the tunnel, and burst out of the hatch, sealing it behind him. The world outside was no longer a valley. It was the inside of a hurricane. The wind was a solid, screaming thing, and the rain was like horizontal ice. Gale was at the hatch, soaked, terrified, but holding his ground. "Good boy, to the barn! Go!" he roared over the storm. Gale, understanding the command, bolted toward the distant safe structure. Corbin ran, head down, toward the drilling team. They were still working. The high-pitched whine of the drill was agonizing. Gavin, his face a mask of furious greed, was screaming at his head driller, the grizzled man, who was hesitating. "Shut it down!" Corbin bellowed, tackling the driller away from the controls. "What the hell are you?" Gavin started. "Listen to me." Corbin grabbed the front of Gavin's expensive red jacket. "You want to know the price? We are all about to pay it. That cliff is collapsing. You are drilling into a fault line." "It's just rain!" Gavin screamed back, trying to shove him off. "The ground is soft, boss," the driller shouted, his face pale. "He's right. It feels wrong." As if summoned, a sound tore through the storm. It was not thunder. It was a low, guttural, tearing crack. A house-sized boulder broke free from the top of Cliff A and crashed into the gorge below. The men froze. Corbin pointed at them, his voice the pure, cutting command of an officer in combat. "You have maybe 3 minutes before that entire wall comes down. When it does, it dams the gorge. This entire valley will be a lake. We will all drown. The main barn is reinforced. It's the only chance you have. Go, now!" The panic was instant. The men abandoned the rig and ran, slipping and falling in the mud, scrambling for the barn. Corbin shoved Gavin after them. "Move!" As they ran, Corbin broke away, veering toward the old green pickup truck. "Where are you going, you fool?" Gavin shrieked. "The barn is this way." Corbin ignored him. He wrenched the truck door open. A split second later, a gray and white shape leaped from the darkness. Gale. He had seen his master change course and had broken from the safety of the barn to join him. He landed on the passenger seat, whining, but he was in. "No time to argue, boy. Hang on." Corbin fired the engine. He slammed the truck into four-wheel drive and spun it around, heading away from the barn, toward the explosives locker. The tires screamed for grip. He skidded to a stop, found the heavy-duty lock, and used the key from Orville's workshop. His military training took over. He grabbed the dynamite, the caps, the detonator. He was not a hermit. He was a sapper. He threw the gear into the truck bed and gunned the engine, driving straight into the teeth of the storm toward the coordinates of Cliff B. The world was a gray wall of water. The truck hydroplaned, the engine whining. Beside him, Gale was a rigid statue of terror, his claws digging into the bench seat, but he was there. He was the anchor. Corbin reached the wall of shale. He knew from the map exactly where to plant the charges. He jumped out, the wind nearly tearing him from his feet. He worked with a speed he did not know he still possessed. He set the charges, ran the wire, and leaped back into the cab, soaked to the bone. He backed the truck up, his heart hammering. "Cover your ears, boy," he yelled. He hit the detonator. The explosion was a dull, heavy thump, muffled by the rain. But the ground beneath them jumped. An entire section of the shale cliff slumped, groaned, and then dissolved, washing away in a torrent of mud and rock. A new, dark channel had been torn open, and not a moment too soon. From the other side of the valley, a sound began that was lower than hearing, a vibration that shook the truck's frame. Cliff A was letting go. With a final agonizing roar, the entire face of the mountain tore free. 1 billion tons of rock and earth fell into the narrow gorge, a titanic final splash. The exit was gone. A wall of black water, churning with trees and rock, surged backwards from the blocked gorge. The flash flood, now trapped, rebounded into the valley. "Hang on, Gale!" Corbin yelled. The water surged toward them, a brown, rolling wave. It hit the ridge, swirled, and then it found the new path. It found Corbin's hole. The flash flood turned, like a charging bull finding a new gate. It roared past the truck, filling the new channel, and disappeared down the other side of the mountain. Corbin sat, his hands locked on the steering wheel, his entire body shaking in the sudden, deafening silence of the flood's passing. He had done it. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting the wheel. He wasn't reacting. He had directed the catastrophe. Gale, no longer rigid, crept across the seat and licked Corbin's face, pulling him back from the edge. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a scoured, transformed world. The valley was intact. The new river was already settling. Flashing blue and red lights arrived with the morning. Gavin and his men, pale and shivering, emerged from the barn to find the sheriff and an older man in a state geologist's jacket. "Who in God's name was drilling on that cliff?" the geologist demanded, pointing at the massive fresh landslide. Gavin's crew, facing legal charges for triggering a disaster, pointed as one. Gavin, his face ashen, was quietly arrested. The geologist, his tag reading Dr. Merrill, approached Corbin. "You're Orville's heir? I'm Merrill. I was a friend of his. I came with the emergency crew." He looked at the new raw river channel. This is incredible engineering. It saved the entire watershed. How did you know to do this?" Corbin just looked at Gale, who sat, muddy and tired, at his feet. Later, Corbin showed Dr. Merrill the bunker. The geologist was speechless. "My God," he whispered, running his hands over the console. "He actually did it. We all thought he was a crackpot. This is the most advanced private seismic array I have ever seen. This is priceless." "This station needs to be protected," Dr. Merrill said. "It needs to be run, studied." "I know," Corbin said. He looked at the final inscription on the console. "Listen and protect." Weeks later, the valley was healing. The new river had found its bed. Under a special federal grant, the Howling Wind Valley Listening Post was officially commissioned, with Corbin as its sole custodian. Corbin stood on the ridge. He was not hiding. He was watching. The phantom helicopter blades were gone, replaced by the low, steady thrum of the earth. He was no longer a man reacting to the past. He was a man listening to the future. Gale came and sat beside him, pushing his heavy head against Corbin's hand. He was not just an anchor. He was a partner. They were the guardians, the keepers of the valley's rhythm. They had found their value. In a world that often shouts, perhaps the greatest comfort comes not from speaking, but from being truly heard. Corbin and Gale remind us that the deepest loyalty often needs no words, and the most profound value is found not in what we can take from the earth, but in what we choose to protect. If these stories of quiet strength and unwavering duty resonate with you, we hope you will join our community by subscribing. Your support, through a like or a share, helps these tales reach others who understand the bond between a veteran and their loyal companion. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of Gale's journey. Our newest story is now waiting for you on the screen, and we hope to see you there.